All right. I think we're ready to go. So thank you again. We are here today at the DuPage County Historical Museum. We're going to do a virtual tour of our exhibit, Together We Win, DuPage in World War II. We want to thank the DuPage Foundation for sponsoring this exhibit. This will close next week on April 16th. And we're excited to have you here today for a virtual tour of everything that we have back here. So if you want to follow me, we're actually going to start over here with this poster, Together We Win. This is how we got the name for our exhibit. This was a poster that was actually from World War I. It was recreated in World War II. And what we liked about this was that it said, Together We Win. And World War II was about alliances between the Allied powers, between the Axis powers, and also between the US government and the citizens here on the home front. As we go through this exhibit today, I'm going to give you an overview of what was happening in World War II. I'm also going to tell you what was happening here in DuPage County and how this war was affecting the lives of the citizens here in our area. As we begin to move over here, we are at the first case in our exhibit. And we are organized chronologically, beginning with the rise of Nazi Germany. We'll give a little background on the origins of World War II. This included Germany's defeat after World War I in 1918, the rise of right-wing parties in Germany, including Adolf Hitler's National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party for short, and Hitler becoming Chancellor of Germany. This led to the Nazi Party's use of violence to erode democratic institutions in Germany and to the targeting of the Jewish population. Hitler became Chancellor. He began rebuilding Germany's military and planned to reclaim territory that Germany lost in World War I and expand across Europe. In 1938, France and Great Britain tried to appease Hitler at the Munich conference, but Hitler broke his promise from this conference, and between 1939 and 1941, Germany began moving through Europe, conquering a number of countries. Germany aligned itself with Italy and Japan, which formed the Axis powers. Here we have a poster about Pearl Harbor, and as we move down, we have a newspaper with a headline about Pearl Harbor. Up until December, the United States had remained neutral, but on December 7th, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. Following this, the United States almost immediately declared war on Japan, and on December 11th, the US also declared war on Germany and Italy. With this, the US had officially joined World War II. There were at least 2 soldiers from DuPage County who were among the 2,403 civilians and soldiers who lost their lives at Pearl Harbor. This included William Fred Gussie, who was 19 of Glen Ellen. And also, you see the photo back there of Bernard Arthur Wire. He was 25, a resident of Downers Grove. He was a private in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he perished aboard the USS Arizona. As we begin moving over to our second case, we look at the military campaigns and the fighting that defines the war. As we move into the 1940s, the United States has joined with Great Britain and the Soviet Union to form the Allied powers. U.S. forces fought Axis powers in the European theater, culminating in the Allied powers landing in Normandy, France on D-Day, June 6, 1944, which began the invasion of occupied France and later Germany. U.S. forces also fought in the Pacific theater, working with Australian forces to liberate land throughout the Central Pacific from Japanese forces. As we move down, we'll see a photo of the battleship. This ship served in the Pacific theater. It was named the USS DuPage. They carried soldiers and supplies for the U.S. military. This ship was named after DuPage County. However, no soldiers from DuPage County ever actually served on this ship. It was originally launched as a government cargo ship called the Seahound in December 1942, and the ship was converted into a Bayfield class attack transport in 1943 and renamed after our DuPage County. The USS DuPage fought in 6 major battles in the Pacific from January 1944 until March 1946. Here you see a piece of a plane. This is from 1945. It was a Japanese kamikaze plane that flew into the ship. It did damage the ship. It killed 35 servicemen and wounded 136 others. The USS DuPage was decommissioned after the war and sold to a shipping company. As we move over a little bit, we see a thank you letter and a book. Now, these were from Elmhurst residents who donated 3 boxes of books to the USS DuPage's library. And there you can see the thank you letter, thanking the residents of Elmhurst for their donation. And there we see one of the books that they donated. As we continue to move over, we begin to look at how America's entry into the war required a tremendous effort and sacrifice here on the home front as well. The US government was heavily regulating the American economy through efforts like the War Production Board and the War Food Administration, which was meant to ensure that there would be enough supplies and food to sustain the armed forces. Here, we see a photo of a small airfield. In 1941, the US Navy requisitioned, or officially claimed use of, a small airfield owned by George J. Ball. This was on the western edge of DuPage County, and it was used to run a civilian pilot training program. In 1942, Howard Aircraft Company built a plant east of the airport to produce Howard DGA planes, and these were single-engine civil aircraft. They were used by the U.S. Navy for medical evacuation, transport, and training. And in 1944, the Howard plant closed. In 1946, the United States government sold the airport to DuPage County for $1. As we begin to move over here, as we had mentioned earlier, the U.S. government rationed scarce goods during the war to ensure that the armed forces had enough supplies to fight the war. Items like tires, coffee, gasoline, butter, cheese, and shoes were all rationed. The government issued ration books, like you're seeing now, to help citizens regulate their use of these supplies. These are ration books that we have that were issued to residents in Wheaton and West Chicago, as well as Glen Ellen. Americans were also participating in scrap drives, victory gardens, and civil defense exercises as part of the war effort. As we move over here, I do want to point out this photo. This is hospital apprentice first class Fred Lester. He was a resident of Downers Grove, and he was the only serviceman in World War II from DuPage County to receive the Medal of Honor, which is the United States' highest military award for valor. He was wounded during the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, and when he realized his wounds were fatal, he declined medical care to allow other servicemen to receive care. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. We'll move over here. We look at Japanese incarceration, and we did use this terminology after coordinating with the Japanese American Service Committee. There was a fear following Pearl Harbor of spies. U.S. citizens who were of Japanese descent were targeted, and this did not accurately reflect how Japanese Americans viewed themselves, which was as American citizens. They were put in incarceration camps, and to a lesser extent, Italian Americans and German Americans were also targeted for incarceration camps. As we move over here, we've now moved into the mid-1940s, and we are coming to the end of World War II. Earlier, we had mentioned D-Day, June 6, 1944, when Allied troops crossed the English Channel and landed on the beaches in Normandy, France, taking control of northwestern France and liberating Paris by August 30th, 1944. D-Day was the largest amphibious invasion in history, and it gave Allied powers a foothold in continental Europe, allowing them to eventually invade Germany. 4,400 Allied soldiers lost their lives on D-Day, and more than 5,600 were wounded. After this, Allied forces began pushing German forces eastward into Belgium and the Netherlands toward Germany. US and British forces won the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last counteroffensive, in January 1945. Hitler committed suicide on April 30th, 1945, and Germany surrendered on May 8th, and this is commemorated as VE, Victory of Europe Day. War did continue until September 2nd, 1945, when the United States declared victory of Japan, or VJ Day. This followed the United States dropping an atomic bomb on Hiroshima in August and a second bomb on Nagasaki on August 9th. We'll start to move over here, where we reflect on the lives lost in World War II. We first mentioned the Holocaust, and this is when Nazi Germany deliberately murdered approximately 6 million Jews and at least 5 million prisoners of war, Romani, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and other victims. World War II also resulted in the deaths of 416,800 American soldiers and 1,700 civilians, and injuries to approximately 670,000 soldiers. As we begin to move over, we do include a photo of Sergeant John Kramer II of Glen Ellen, a soldier from DuPage County, and one of the many soldiers who lost his life. Some veterans struggled with readjustment to civilian life because of physical or mental injuries, which included post-traumatic stress disorder. Now we're moving over to our last two cases in the exhibit, where we highlight soldiers who either were from DuPage County or who later settled in DuPage County and who served in World War II. As we look down here, we think about the draft. In 1940, the United States enacted its first peacetime draft to recruit more men for the armed forces in case the country had to fight the Axis powers. And we do have a photo here from 1942 of newly recruited soldiers posing outside a draft board office in Downers Grove. The men who joined the U.S. Armed Forces, either voluntarily or through the draft, served for a minimum of 30 months. Recruits went through basic training, then more specialized training after they received an assignment. Experiences varied greatly based on the branch of service and assigned theater. We'll look at some of the uniforms of men who were either living in DuPage County or who had moved to this area following the war. This first uniform you see here is of Seaman Second Class Barclay J. McGregor. He was born in New York and he moved to Wheaton in 1930. We move over. We next see the uniform of Corporal Donald C. Waldoni, who is from Chicago and lived in Lombard after the war. see a photo there of him as well. As we move up, we'll look at the medals from Lieutenant Colonel Eugene A. Diamond's service in the Army and Air Force. He eventually moved to Wheaton, and he served both in World War II as well as in the Korean War. Our final uniform is from First Sergeant Robert A. H. Schober, who was from Wheaton. And we also have a photo of Robert Schober in our exhibit as well. Here in our final case, we look at the women who joined the war effort. American women had served as nurses in the military since the early 1900s, but during World War II, the United States needed women to take military jobs at home. In 1942, the government created military units for women, including the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the WAC. These women did face discrimination because of beliefs that military work was too masculine and fears that they were taking non-combat jobs away from men. We'll look first at this cap, and this nurse's cap belonged to Grace Dillon of the Army Nurses Corps. Grace Dillon was born in Oak Park and moved to Roselle in 1926. She joined the Army Nurse Corps at age 21 in 1942. She served at U.S. military installations in the Pacific Theater. After the war, Dillon moved to Clarendon Hills and joined the Nyota Rogers American Legion Post in Elmhurst, where she eventually served as its commander. And the last thing we'll look at in our tour is this uniform of Sergeant Laura Kearns. And we have a photo here of her. She was a member of the WAC. Laura R. Kearns grew up in a large farm family on the River Road in Naperville. In December 1942, she became the first woman from her hometown to join the armed forces. She trained at Fort Des Moines in the Administrative Specialist School, then worked as a postal clerk at Camp Pickett in Virginia, and later as a general clerk in the Transportation Office of the Port of Embarkation in Hampton Roads, Virginia, until March 1946. She obtained the rank of sergeant and earned 4 medals. Thank you again for joining us for this virtual tour of Together We Win, DuPage in World War II. As we can see from this tour, we highlighted the sacrifices that were required of people who were both serving in the military at the time, as well as here on the home front. And the effects of this war have been felt for generations since. I'd like to invite you to visit our website at dupagemuseum.org, where you can see a list of our current and upcoming exhibitions, and where you can also see other virtual tours for other exhibits. Thank you again.